This morning, as the cameras locked into place and the rotor wash from Marine One whipped across the South Lawn, there was a moment, just a flicker of a moment, when the image told you more than the words ever could. Behind Donald Trump stood a line of uniformed generals, decorated, disciplined, immaculately composed. But if you looked closely, what you saw was not confidence. It was calculation. It was the tight jaw of men who understand consequence. Because what happened today was not a policy dispute. It was not another skirmish in a long trade war. It was something far more intimate and far more dangerous. It began, as these things often do, with something small. A question about Arctic defense spending, a routine inquiry about radar modernization and icebreaker procurement topics that normally generate polite nods and vague assurances. But according to multiple officials present at the earlier intelligence briefing, the president had just been told something he does not like to hear, that the United States needs Canada. Not symbolic, not diplomatically, operationally. The northern flank of the continent, our northern flank, is not secured by ocean or wall, but by geography and partnership. And geography, inconveniently, cannot be negotiated. So when the question came, the irritation was already simmering. He stepped to the microphones and did not answer the budget question. Instead, he detonated something else entirely. He called Canada a security liability. He announced he was suspending their Tier 3 security clearance within Joint Command structures. He said they were out of the room. Now, that phrase "out of the room" sounds theatrical, but in military terms, it is seismic. Tier 3 clearance within the intelligence sharing hierarchy is not a courtesy. It is a binding thread in the web that keeps the North American defense system intact. It is what allows Canadian officers to sit inside the command infrastructure of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, North American Aerospace Defense Command, better known as NORAD, and share, in real time, the data that determines whether an object streaking across the Arctic sky is a commercial flight, a test missile, or something far worse. And then, when pressed, when reminded that Canada invoked collective defense after the attacks of September 11, when reminded that Canadian forces fought and died alongside Americans in Kandahar under NATO command, he laughed. He waved it away as a bad deal. He reduced the loss of 612 Canadian service members to a transactional miscalculation. There are moments in history when rhetoric reshapes reality. That was one of them. Within minutes, the reaction in Ottawa was not loud. It was cold. The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, did not respond with fury. He did not trade insults. He walked to a podium in front of the National War Memorial and read a single name, just one. A reminder that alliances are not abstractions. They are built on individuals who never came home. And while the television panels debated tone, something else was happening quietly inside the Pentagon. A memo circulated among the Joint Chiefs. The subject line, according to two defense officials familiar with its contents, was blunt. Operational Risk Assessment Northern Exposure. The concern was not emotional. It was mathematical. For 70-plus years, the United States has relied on radar arrays, listening stations, and early warning installations stretched across the Canadian Arctic. The North Warning System's successor to Cold War-era detection lines provides critical minutes of advance notice in the event of missile launches over the polar route. Missiles do not respect borders. They follow the curvature of the Earth. And that curvature brings them first across Canada. If access to those installations is limited, if data sharing is delayed, or if coordination fractures, the early warning window narrows. In nuclear strategy, minutes are not symbolic. They are existential. And this is where the rhetoric meets the reality. Because alliances are not just treaties. They are interoperable systems. They are encrypted data links, shared satellites, common protocols. When you say out of the room, you are not just removing a chair. You are interrupting a network. By midday, reports emerged that Canadian officers embedded at NORAD headquarters in Colorado Springs were seeking clarification about their status. Some were told to stand down from certain briefings pending review. No one was shouting. But confusion in a defense apparatus designed around clarity is its own kind of alarm. Meanwhile, on social media, the hashtag referencing the 612 fallen Canadian soldiers began trending globally. Photos resurfaced Canadian medics carrying wounded American Marines, joint patrols in Afghanistan, flag-draped coffins along the Highway of Heroes in Ontario. Veterans from both countries posted statements expressing disbelief. Inside military culture, an institution built as much on honor as on firepower, the mocking of Allied war dead cuts deep. It violates an unwritten code. You can debate strategy. You can criticize policy, but you do not ridicule sacrifice. As Washington processed the shockwave, Ottawa pivoted to policy. Prime Minister Carney announced what he called a national security review of energy exports to the United States. He did not shut off pipelines. He did not declare retaliation. He invoked legal language, national interest, security assessment, compliance review. It was bureaucratic, it was precise, and it was potent. Here is the structural truth. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the United States. American refineries, particularly in the Midwest and Gulf Coast, are calibrated to process heavy crude blends that Canada provides. Quebec supplies hydroelectric power to parts of the northeastern United States. Cross-border energy trade is not a favor. It is a symbiotic system. Within hours of the announcement of heightened inspections and review protocols, energy traders began recalibrating projections. Spot electricity prices in parts of New England spiked. Oil futures ticked upward, not catastrophically, but noticeably. Markets, unlike politicians, respond instantly to perceived instability. At the same time, defense analysts noted another development. Russian long-range bombers approached the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone. Such flights are not unprecedented. They are, in fact, routine tests of readiness. Under normal circumstances, American and Canadian fighter jets coordinate interception as part of established NORAD protocol. But amid the diplomatic rupture, coordination required additional verification. The bombers turned back before violating airspace. Still, the timing was instructive. Moscow has long sought to undermine Western cohesion. It has used cyber operations, propaganda, and strategic probing to test alliance resilience. When fractures appear, even rhetorical ones, adversaries observe carefully. China, for its part, issued a brief statement emphasizing the importance of stable trade partnerships and extended an invitation to Canadian officials for economic discussions in Beijing. On paper, it was ordinary diplomacy. In context, it was strategic courtship. All of this unfolded in less than 12 hours. Now, step back for a moment and consider the structural architecture of the North American alliance. Since World War II, the United States and Canada have maintained one of the closest defense relationships in the world. NATO binds them within a broader transatlantic framework. NORAD binds them bilaterally in continental defense. Supply chains bind their economies. A car assembled in Michigan may cross the border multiple times before completion. Agricultural markets are intertwined. Financial systems are integrated. When a president characterizes such a partner as a security risk and mocks its war casualties, the immediate fallout is emotional. The secondary fallout is institutional. The tertiary fallout is strategic. Veterans groups in the United States issued statements expressing solidarity with Canadian forces. Several retired generals appeared on cable news urging de-escalation. Inside the State Department, diplomats scrambled to reassure counterparts that formal treaties remained intact. Words were chosen carefully. Review rather than revocation. Temporary suspension rather than termination. But trust, once publicly questioned, is not easily restored by semantic adjustment. Economic analysts began outlining potential ripple effects. If energy flows are slowed by regulatory review, refineries face higher input costs. If border inspections intensify on both sides, just-in-time manufacturing schedules falter. The auto industry, heavily reliant on cross-border parts integration, could experience production delays. Agricultural exporters might face retaliatory tariffs. Inflationary pressure, already a domestic concern, could intensify. This is the paradox of interdependence. It creates prosperity and vulnerability simultaneously. The more integrated two economies become, the more damage rhetorical escalation can cause. Inside political circles, advisors reportedly debated next steps. One faction urged a calibrated walkback, an affirmation of respect for Canadian service, while maintaining negotiation leverage on defense spending. Another argued that backing down would signal weakness. The president, as always, weighed optics. But markets are indifferent to optics. They price risk. By late afternoon, the Dow Jones Industrial Average experienced heightened volatility. Energy sector stocks fluctuated. Defense contractors watched the situation warily, aware that alliance instability complicates procurement planning. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Carney reiterated that Canada remains committed to continental defense, but emphasized that mutual respect is the foundation of shared security. It was a diplomat's rebuke measured pointed. The deeper question now facing policymakers is not whether tempers will cool. They often do. It is whether structural trust has been eroded in ways that adversaries can exploit. If intelligence sharing is politicized even briefly, does that create hesitation in crisis moments? If energy trade is framed as leverage, does that encourage diversification away from reliance on U.S. markets? Alliances rarely collapse overnight. They fray, they loosen thread by thread until the fabric weakens. For decades, the United States has operated under the assumption that North America is a strategic sanctuary protected by oceans and bolstered by an unshakable partnership with Canada. Today, that assumption feels less absolute. And so we arrive at the central tension of this moment. The president sought to project strength, to demonstrate that America owes nothing. But strength in alliances is not measured solely by dominance. It is measured by reliability. If this crisis de-escalates, if cooler heads restore formal cooperation, there will still be a scar. Canadian policymakers may accelerate diversification of trade relationships with Europe or Asia. American defense planners may revisit contingency plans for reduced northern coordination. Investors may incorporate a new premium into North American risk assessments. If it escalates, if energy reviews become restrictions, if military coordination becomes conditional, the consequences compound quickly. History teaches us that alliances often endure strain. The United States and Canada have disagreed before over Vietnam, over Iraq, over trade disputes, but those disagreements rarely descended into public mockery of shared sacrifice. There is a moral dimension here that transcends policy. Soldiers who died in Afghanistan did so under a coalition banner. They did not parse domestic politics. They answered allied commitments. To dismiss that as a bad deal is to recast bloodshed as a ledger entry. That reframing resonates deeply within military communities. It reverberates in families who remember folded flags and solemn ceremonies. And it reverberates in adversarial capitals, calculating whether the North American shield is as unified as it once appeared. Tonight, diplomats are on secure lines attempting to stabilize what can be stabilized. Defense officials are reviewing protocols to ensure continuity of operations. Economists are modeling contingencies. Politicians are preparing statements. But beneath the tactical maneuvering lies a strategic reality. Geography binds the United States and Canada together. No speech can alter the curvature of the Earth. Missiles still fly over the pole. Energy still flows across pipelines. Supply chains still cross bridges. The question now is not whether the alliance is worth saving. It is whether rhetoric will yield to recognition of interdependence. Because once you tell a partner to leave the room, you may discover that the room was holding up the roof. And in the coming days, whether through quiet diplomatic repair or further escalation, we will learn whether this was a momentary rupture or the beginning of something more enduring. The next 96 hours will not be shaped by hashtags. They will be shaped by decisions taken in secure conference rooms and trading floors and military command centers. History rarely announces itself with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a press scrum on a windy lawn. Sometimes it hides in a laugh that echoes louder than intended. What happened today was not just a diplomatic spat. It was a test of whether the bonds forged in war can withstand the heat of politics. And the answer to that test will define not just a news cycle, but the strategic map of an entire continent. By early morning the next day, the ripple effects of Trump's statement were no longer theoretical. They were measurable. In Washington, nervous aides were running simulations of what a temporarily decoupled North American defense network might look like. Analysts at NORAD were mapping out scenarios where Canada, feeling insulted and sidelined, restricted access to northern radar installations. Even a partial delay in real-time missile tracking could reduce early warning windows by nearly 20 minutes. In nuclear terms, that is a difference measured not in hours, but in life and death seconds. Across the Pentagon, officers walked the halls in near silence, a tension usually reserved for wartime deployments. Nobody was panicking, not yet. But everyone knew how fragile the system had suddenly become. The veneer of control, painstakingly maintained for decades, had been punctured by a single, careless insult. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, Prime Minister Carney was methodical. This was not a reaction in the moment. This was strategy in slow motion. He called his economic and energy advisors and asked them to begin phased implementation of Operation Sovereign North, a cross-departmental plan designed to signal Canada's capacity to leverage critical infrastructure without immediately shutting off supplies. By noon, reports indicated that inspection protocols at key border energy points had already been initiated. Crude oil shipments from Alberta to the U.S. were being diverted through additional environmental reviews. Hydropower deliveries from Quebec to the Northeast faced similar scrutiny. Nothing was illegal. Nothing was overtly aggressive. But in practice, These bureaucratic adjustments were already producing measurable stress on the U.S. energy grid. The American media had a field day. Headlines alternated between Trump attacks ally and Canada retaliates quietly. Social feeds lit up with both outrage and panic. But beyond the optics, the consequences were cascading. Industrial plants relying on Canadian energy faced reduced capacity. Refiners accustomed to the heavy crudes of Alberta scrambled to adjust feedstocks. Electricity prices in major metropolitan hubs spiked unpredictably. Trucking companies reported delays at customs points as Canadian border officers applied enhanced review procedures. Investors adjusted portfolios. Stocks in energy, manufacturing, and defense sectors became volatile. A single rhetorical act, the mocking of 612 fallen soldiers, was now a tangible, measurable strain on the U.S. economy. The military fallout was equally striking. NORAD, designed for seamless U.S.-Canada coordination, now operated with a layer of uncertainty. Protocols normally automatic required verification. Joint exercises were postponed or scaled down. U.S. officers accustomed to the reliability of Canadian counterparts were forced to account for potential gaps in information. The psychological effect on service members cannot be overstated. For decades, soldiers had relied on mutual trust, on shared sacrifice. Today, that trust had been questioned publicly by the commander-in-chief himself. Veteran groups reacted with near-universal condemnation. Stories surfaced on social media. Americans saved in firefights by Canadian units. Canadians pinned down in Afghan operations while protecting U.S. forces. Each story reinforced the sense that this was not abstract politics. It was a personal affront to men and women who had bled side by side. And yet, across the border, Carney was calm. He did not raise his voice. He did not rally the public with incendiary rhetoric. Instead, he communicated discipline. In his briefings, he emphasized legality, proportion, and strategy. Each action was designed to maximize leverage without providing a pretext for escalation. He was demonstrating a principle that Trump would not or could not grasp. Power is quiet, cumulative, and structural. You cannot project credibility through insult alone. By the afternoon, the U.S. political apparatus faced a dual crisis: domestic optics and strategic vulnerability. Trump's aides attempted damage control, but public statements were either contradicted internally or outright ignored by the administration's own communications machine. Republicans who had long tolerated his unfiltered style expressed concern in private channels. Defense planners issued internal advisories, cautioning that continued diplomatic missteps could erode confidence in North American early warning system. Congress quietly summoned energy and defense officials for hearings behind closed doors. The story had escaped the realm of headlines. It had entered the realm of operational risk. Internationally, the shockwaves were immediate. Russian and Chinese intelligence analysts took careful note. The message was clear. The United States had publicly alienated its closest continental ally while mocking their military contributions. It was a geopolitical opportunity too obvious to ignore. Within hours, briefings were circulated through Moscow and Beijing highlighting the fragility of U.S. northern defense partnerships. Even the smallest testing flights over Alaska, previously routine, were now loaded with signaling potential. As evening fell, Trump doubled down publicly. In a series of posts, he criticized Canadian energy inspections as politically motivated. He warned that any interruption of trade would be disastrous for Canadian interests. His language oscillated between bluster and veiled threat. But the pattern was predictable. Offense first, negotiation never. Economists and defense officials noted that every tweet increased the perceived instability, pushing markets and military planners to hedge against worst-case scenarios. The final piece of the puzzle was the human element. Behind every report, every memo, every simulation were individuals confronted with choices. Canadian engineers ensured energy infrastructure functioned under enhanced scrutiny. American generals recalculated response protocols. Border officers enforced additional inspections. Trade officials coordinated with counterparts to maintain minimal flow while signaling dissatisfaction. Each person, acting within a bureaucratic and legal framework, amplified the consequences of a single, reckless public statement. By midnight, the map of North America had not changed physically. Borders were the same. Pipelines still crossed rivers. Radar stations still dotted the Arctic. But the invisible map, the one that defines trust, reliability, and predictability, had shifted. A once seamless alliance now contained cracks visible to adversaries. Strategic planners knew this moment would be studied for decades. Not because treaties had been broken, but because personal insult had translated into tangible systemic stress. Tomorrow, the world will awaken to questions. Will Trump walk back? Will Canadian actions tighten further? Will markets stabilize? Or will panic ripple into tangible shortages and price spikes? And perhaps most importantly, how will soldiers, veterans, and the public interpret the betrayal of trust, the mocking of sacrifice, and the exposure of a vulnerability that had never before been publicly acknowledged? This is more than politics. This is the interface of rhetoric and reality. One man's desire to appear strong in a press scrum had triggered the largest strategic reassessment of North America in decades. And for the first time, the United States faced the possibility of isolation not because of external enemies, but because of the breach between its own words and the structural interdependence upon which the continent had relied. In the coming hours, decisions will be made that are not captured in tweets. Alliances will be recalibrated in secure rooms. Pipelines, borders, and early warning systems will be managed under a new set of assumptions. And history will remember this day, not for the words spoken, but for the consequences that could not be unsaid. Because for all the bluster, all the tweets, all the political theater, the truth remains. 612 lives sacrificed in Afghanistan, decades of operational integration, and the structural integrity of continental defense are not negotiable. And when they are treated as disposable, the cost is immediate, measurable, and enduring. The question for Americans, Canadians, and the world is simple. Can trust be restored, or has the rupture created a permanent fracture? And in the next 96 hours, that question will stop being hypothetical.